So I would like to invite Asher Regan from Yad Hanadi Foundation to explain us about the competition in general. Asher, please.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see all of you. Thank you for coming to this session. My name is Asher Regan. I work at Yad Hanadi, which is the Rothschild Foundation in Israel. And one of our main projects for many years has been supporting the renewal of the National Library in Israel. And if any of you have been to Jerusalem recently, you will have seen a building rising up above the street level right across from the Israel Museum and the Knesset building. And the new building of the National Library is a major event in the cultural life of Israel. It's an opportunity to take an institution that has always been central to preserving and disseminating access to Jewish culture and to make it a central cultural institution that's easily accessible in a beautiful setting and that provides huge new opportunities for people to see materials and interact with them and learn about the collections that the library has and the creative output of the Jewish people for the last 2,000 years and more in some cases. This competition is part of that renewal process, and it focuses on another aspect of the National Library Renewal Project, which is the digital side of things. The library's mission to collect, preserve, and provide access to materials of Israel, all the cultures in Israel, and of the Jewish people is a mission that today, at least on the side of dissemination, also on the side of collection, is best realized in digital space. And realizing this mission in digital space creates a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges. Digital access to materials is widely available today. Unlike, say, 10 or 15 years ago, where a lot of materials were not scanned and were not digitized and weren't available online, today there's a wealth of materials from the library website, from other websites, covering almost every aspect of Jewish life available online. The challenge is that using these materials and using them in ways that are relevant to people, especially to younger people, is becoming more and more difficult. Digital space changes constantly, and while the library is doing making tremendous progress in providing access to materials, we think that this is a project that is well beyond the abilities of any one institution to complete. And so we've launched this competition with the goal of having people help to build the access and tools for using and discovering and making sense and deriving meaning from digital objects and digital cultural objects relating to the National Library collections or to similar collections around the world. The Tarboot competition, Tarboot means culture in Hebrew, is focused on using digital culture. And our goal is to help people develop technological tools that make materials easier to use, more impactful, and more widely distributed in daily lives, whether it's in educational settings, in gaming sessions, on social media, whether it's taking existing objects and doing things with them, enhancing them, or improving searchability across objects, the ability to find things or to link different objects together using things like oral history, where very often you'll have thousands and thousands of hours of testimony of people covering almost every event of the second half of the 20th century, but it's very hard to find those few minutes that people are actually looking for, and even harder to help use those few minutes of oral testimony in context with other objects that may exist. And so we hope that people who have both a love of the content, a passion for using this content in meaningful ways, and technological abilities to do things that are special, unique, innovative, haven't been done yet, can come together and present projects to us. The competition itself was launched in February, and there is just under a month left for the first round of the competition. The competition will take place in two main stages. The first stage, which is ending May 25th, is the initial application stage. In this stage, people have to submit relatively brief documents, up to 3 pages or a 3-minute film or the equivalent of that, describing the project that you want to create, why you think it's meaningful and why you think you can do it. This is not a hackathon. We're not looking just for ideas. We'd like to have people who can build things and build significant things. From this stage, we will select a group of finalists, 10, 15, maybe 20 projects who will go on to the second stage. Projects in the second stage will receive mentoring, will be brought to Israel to work with Israeli tech companies and experts who can help them develop their ideas, whether it's in the NLP space or image analysis or big data and AI, to develop a proof of concept project that will be submitted to the final phase. The competition takes place in 3 different tracks. There's a track for startup companies, a track for students, and a general track for everyone else. Winners of each track will receive a $50,000. There'll be 1 winner in each track, and that winner will receive a $50,000 prize. In addition to the prize, Yad Nadiv has set aside $3 million for implementing projects. So of the finalist projects that reach the final stage, those projects that the judges, the National Library of Israel and Yad Nadiv deem suitable for implementation will receive an investment in order to turn them from a proof of concept idea into an actual product that can be used. The submissions do not have to use necessarily National Library materials, but the final solutions have to be relevant for the National Library so that it makes sense to invest in them and implement the solution on National Library materials. They can be relevant for any other institution as well, and they can be widely used and distributed. We hope that this competition offers an opportunity for people to not only get to know the National Library, but to help the new National Library actually attain its goal of making Jewish and Israeli cultural history widely distributed, widely used, and impactful in the ways that it can be. And we really think, and that's one of the reasons we named it Tarboot culture. Culture is probably the most important subject today, and affects our lives in every single way. And there's probably not one problem that we complain about that isn't in some way related to culture. And we think this competition is an opportunity to broaden the scope of what culture means and to make it play a positive role in our lives. So thank you all for coming. Please ask us questions. We'll do our best to answer. And we hope to see all of you participating in the competition.
Thank you very much, Asher. Now I would like to invite Rachel Yukelis, Head of Collection at the National Library. And Rachel will give us an overview of the library materials. Rachel?
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you, and we are very excited about this competition and especially the opportunity to open up our collections for you and many others across the world. I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce you to our collections, and my colleague Yaron Deutscher will then focus in on the digital collections that are available for the competition. I want to start here. Some of you might recognize this scene from The Name of the Rose. And I start here because often when people think of libraries, they think of places that might look like this, in the sense that libraries for people outside of the library world aren't necessarily the locus of cutting edge technology. But it turns out that libraries and technology have gone hand in hand ever since the beginning. And while this might not look like technological innovation to us, we're actually looking at a radical transformation of the way that knowledge was preserved when the human beings moved from the scroll to the codex. And the ability to line them up in the back, we see them sitting one on top of the other, enabled people to accumulate and to identify easily material and browse through a page and find something. You know, this doesn't sound like technology to us, but this was an extraordinarily important advance in that time. If we move forward to our time, libraries are incorporating technology in many, many different ways. You know, here's just an amusing example of the reference librarian bot who can answer questions for you today. And of course, we at the National Library have wonderful reference librarians who are human and who use both physical and many digital channels in order to answer your questions. And I can already say that those of you who, after this competition, are interested in applying and have questions, then please turn to reference@nli.org.il. And also we have chat functions and we have WhatsApp services in different languages. And so my colleagues are standing by. Okay, so what is the National Library? It turns out the National Library of Israel is one of Israel's oldest public institutions. We're looking at on the right, the original room, which you can see was a very modest enterprise when it first started at the end of the 19th century. And the historians among you here might already know or be fascinated to read about all the different debates and discussions in the late 19th century around this question of how to create and the impetus for creating a national library, a library for the whole Jewish people, which interestingly didn't really exist until then. The building to the left was the first permanent building. And again, these were built by intellectuals both in Jerusalem and in the Ukraine, to point out, who had vast ambitions. They were very modest means, but huge ambitions, which I love. Dr. Joseph Chazanovich, who we consider one of our great founding fathers, describes this vision. Again, think about that room you just saw, and the movement forward of building a great house in Jerusalem, high and lofty, in which shall be treasured the fruits of the Jewish people's endeavors from the moment it became a nation. And to this house shall stream our masters, sages, and all the scholars of our nation, everyone with a heart which understands our literature, whose spirit yearns and strives for the Torah and for wisdom, and to know of the history of our people and the lives of our ancestors. So the original vision of the library was a gathering exercise. And in fact, Chazanovich himself was a doctor in Odessa, and instead of taking payment for his medical treatments, he took books, and he ended up shipping over the course of the next decade about 10,000 books that became one of the bases of our library. His vision for the library was quite elitist. It was very focused on Jewish literature and only the great fruits of Jewish literature. But very quickly, the people who built this library were, again, ambitious and breaking through all these original boundaries, both in the direction of incorporating a broader idea of culture, as Asher touched on in the beginning, and also into other religious traditions. And when the Hebrew University was opened in 1925, they had already planned to adopt this library as their research library. And the first main professional director of the library is the man we're looking at, the great humanist and philosopher Shmuel Hugo Bergman. And he identified 3 different circles or identities of what this library is and who it serves. First of all, the original founding vision, as we saw, the Library of the Jewish People. This new vision of being a university library for all human and humanistic disciplines. And interestingly, the idea that the library is a meeting place. The library serves all the different residents, citizens, inhabitants, groups, nations, and cultures of this land. And the truth is that these identities carry us until today. And the reason why I take time out to explain this history is it really helps you understand what resides at the library, because the library has all of these different identities in its collection. Extraordinarily deep and rich Judaica collection, and across the board, a varied and rich collection of the land of Israel, the state of Israel, and important research collections, which I'll touch on very soon. In 2007, the Israeli parliament passed the National Library Law, switching once again the identity of this library. And here we see in a quote from the National Library Law: to collect, preserve, develop, and endow collections of knowledge, heritage, and culture in general, that is in the humanities in particular, and those of the Jewish people, the state of and the land of Israel in particular. We take each word, a little like the Declaration of Independence, we read each word very carefully, and notice that the mandate of a library shifted from being all about collecting and preserving to developing and endowing. And one can say the Tarboot collection, the Tarboot competition, comes out of this new vision of the library, not just as a place of collecting, not just the place of meeting in a particular building, but really in a very proactive way, reaching out to different audiences, enabling access, pushing the forefront of culture, identity, history, religion, and all the different humanistic disciplines. And as Asher mentioned, here's the visual. We are heading, please God, to this stunning new building on the landscape of Jerusalem. And I show this picture because it encapsulates the values of our institution today, which is all about opening access. It's one of the few buildings, there is no fence around this building. The public is invited, you are invited to partake in the exploration, the learning, the dialogue, the enjoyment of what it means to be in a great library. And the visuals, the digital side of this, and this is our English face of our website. where every day you see new content. We are gearing up for our Israel Memorial Day and the Independence Day this week, and so that's being featured on our website today. Now, following the 2007 National Library Law, the law in its entirety, which I didn't read for you, goes on to identify several core collections. We saw a focus on the Jewish people, Judaica, the focus on the state of Israel and the land of Israel, the Israel collection. The National Library Law also names the importance of building a core collections, it says, of the cultures of the Middle East and Islam. And that is, if we think about it in circles, our local culture, the regional culture, and then there's the international culture, and that is the focus on the general humanities. For historical reasons, our humanities collection is deepest in the area of classics, Western culture, Western philosophy, and history. But over the last few years, as of course our world changes, we are expanding our focus. These are the core collections, but in terms of the actual content, I want to take you on a quick tour, both in terms of time, space, and genre. So our collection starts in the 5th century. For those of you who've never seen this before, this is a magic incantation bowl, Aramaic. They're mostly Aramaic, sometimes a little in Hebrew and other languages, found in Iraq of today, ancient Babylonia. And it goes all the way to our digital collecting that we're doing, and we do a tremendous amount of digitally born collecting and internet archiving. Here's an example of just a project we ran to collect digital ephemera posters during Corona. The richest part of our collection is, of course, these unique ancient items, which are extraordinary privilege for us to house. We have a collection of about 20,000 Hebrew language manuscripts. And of course, when I say Hebrew language, that means all of the different Judeo languages, Hebrew, Judeo-Arabic, Aramaic, Judeo-Persian, and on and on and on. And we house 10 codices that were written in the Middle Ages, the medieval period. This one is one of the oldest in our collection. This was written in 10th century in this land, probably in Tiberias, connected to the Masoretic movement. And we also have ones that were written in Spain and in Ashkenaz, that is Germany today, and in other locations in Europe. And they ended up all in Syrian communities. And that's why they're called Damascus codices. And remember what we showed in the name of the rose, this is that innovative technology of the book between two covers instead of the scroll. Here's a gorgeous Haggadah from Pesach, 14th century Catalonia. This is a fascinating and beloved text, the Orit, which is what's called the Octateuch, that is the 5 books of Moses, Joshua, Judges, and Ruth, which is the sacred scripture of both Ethiopian Jews and Christians. In this case, this is from the Beit Israel, the Jewish community of Ethiopia, one of a very rare example, and beloved because it was owned by a family for hundreds of years, and they carried it through Sudan when they came to the land of Israel, and then in 2016 decided that it needed to be joined part of the collective memory of the Jewish people. And they deposited at the National Library where they came in, and they've come back every few years to open the text and read it in public. Here is an example from our Islam collection. We have about 2,500 manuscripts in the Arabic letter, that is Arabic, Persian, and Turkish. We are celebrating the first day of Eid al-Fitr, the small, what's called the lesser holiday at the end of Ramadan. 2 months from now will be Eid al-Adha and the culmination of the Hajj pilgrimage, which is what we're looking at. And this is an Ottoman prayer book from the mid-18th century. I'm going to shift a few centuries forward into the as manuscripts turn into archival material, and we are very privileged to have 7,000 pages of Isaac Newton's own handwritten theological reflections, scriptural exegesis, his alchemical writings. It's all very interesting stuff. And of course, you can see here that that Newton knew some Hebrew. He's writing here in Latin. He also writes in English, and it's this material is just an unbelievable way of getting access to one of the great minds of human history. And another great mind, this is the archive, the archive of Martin Buber, and we're looking at the handwritten drafts of Ayin Dao, a great poet and really fascinating woman who became an icon, and the legendary Chana Senish. Her archive came to the library at the end of last year. We're looking at a notebook of songs, and this is the original version of Eli Eli, O Lord my God, which I know I sang around the campfire when I was a camper, a young camper, and I'm guessing a number of you also can relate. And here's Frank Kafka's Hebrew notebooks. Again, he of course was in Prague, but he studied Hebrew for many years, and you can see his handwriting. And here's an example of one of his drawings that we are privileged to house. All this material has been digitized, as is everything I'm showing you today. This one is an example from our very vast newspaper collection. It turns out that all the Hebrew newspapers joined together to produce one newspaper on the day of the declaration of the state. I thought this was an appropriate thing to see on the week of Israel's Independence Day, 74 years. And an example or two from our photograph collection. We have over 3 million digital photographs. Not all of them are available outside the building. Here is from the Dan Hatani collection. Of course, we're looking at the great handshake between Menachem Begin, Jimmy Carter, and Anwar Sadat. Another example of a fabulous local photographer, Dancho Arnon, who documented methodically all the different rituals of the different communities in Israel. And this is a beautiful image from 2016, Old City of Jerusalem during Ramadan, which just ended. And so now we've seen rare materials of manuscripts, and we've seen archival material and photographs. We also host here at the National Library the National Sound Archive, and have the largest collection of Jewish and Israeli music. About 35,000 hours of it has been digitized, including the archival material and songs of great singers and iconic figures like Naomi Shemer. We also have the world's largest collection of printed maps of the Holy Land and of Jerusalem, and I'm sure you've all recognized this image, and it was taken out of these printed Bibles, and this is Heinrich Bunting's imagining of what the world looks like in the shape of a clover leaf, which was, as it says in the top in Gothic German, was the symbol of his beloved hometown Hanover, with Jerusalem in the middle, almost the navel of the world. Few examples from our poster collections. I love these posters. These are from Mandatory Palestine, and it really shows us day to day how people and languages interacted much more freely than one might say today. And we have a soccer poster in 3 languages, Arsenal Cairo against Islamic Ittihad of Haifa, and Tarzan in the Cinema Eden, which is in Tel Aviv, in Arabic and English. So just to sum up, and transitioning from my presentation, which is the general presentation about the NLI collections, to my colleague Yaron Deutscher, head of digital here at the National Library, of all the items I mentioned, here are some of the numbers we're dealing with, the raw material for your visionary ideas in all the different formats that we talk about. I didn't actually touch on books. We have about 4 million volumes of books and periodicals, of which 130,000 are digitized. And yesterday we just announced that we've gotten to 4 million pages of historical newspapers in many languages, which I'm sure Yaron will mention as well. And so this is the raw material, and now your work starts, and that is how do you take all of this material or sections of this material and come up with both innovative ideas, but also effective ways of opening access and making use of all of these treasures. So I wish you the best of luck, and I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Hi, Yaron, just before you start, I want to take advantage of a lovely surprise we have here and introduce Professor Sam Weinberg, who's joined the Zoom with us. And Professor Weinberg is one of the jurors of the competition, one of the people who will be judging the proposals that we receive. And he's a professor of education at Stanford University, and really one of the foremost experts, I think, in the world on using digital materials to learn history, and how this is a process that can go surprisingly wrong in many ways, and needs creative people to work on it and think about how this can be done effectively and in ways that help young people manage the chaos that is sometimes online. And so I completely surprised him and asked Sam to say a few words to us, if he could. Sam, are you with us? Sam, you're on mute. I'm going to unmute you. Just a second.
Okay,
Okay, there we are.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you very much, Asher, and welcome to all of the people here. I'll just say a very few words from my experience about the kinds of things that are effective and less effective. So many of the sites that have been created for museum materials, for library materials, including the US Library of Congress, in the earliest stages started off as essentially digital versions of print materials, of how to essentially make access available by digitizing great quantities of materials and trying to find felicitous ways of offering them. But really, it became a kind of digital version of a library. The more effective ways to think about materials, particularly for an educational context, materials that teachers could use, that professors could use, would be to think about the educative aspect of those materials. How will those materials not only offer access to resources, but themselves be educative? In that sense, the users will learn new things, not simply about the materials, but about the broader disciplinary contexts in which they are working. The common thread that I see in some very good ideas that go south, that go wrong, are just overwhelming people with the volume of the materials rather than providing the scaffolds for how to use them and use them effectively. And then I'll just end by saying a word about so many of the websites and so many of the digital platforms that claim that they are being offered to teachers. I'm speaking about secondary school teachers and elementary school teachers, not higher education. And so many of the sites that I've reviewed and looked at really have no sense of the actual curriculum that teachers are enjoined to teach. It's as if a whole new website is created without any regard to the idea that teachers, by and large, are not freelancers. They have curricula that they have to enact. And so rather than thinking about an innovation and how that innovation articulates with a teacher's job, it's done with almost a disregard to the occupational realities of teachers. So the best sites are those that are mindful of the curriculum and think about materials to both enhance that curriculum, to extend it, to think about it in fundamentally different and innovative ways that a digital platform affords. So good luck to everyone, and it's great to see all these people here, all of you here, and thinking about it.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite Yaron Deutscher, head of digital, that will explain us about in depth about the digital materials that are in the National Library. I see that there are already questions, and some of them concerns to Yaron explanation. So Yaron, be aware.
All right, so thank you, Liron, and thank you, Asher, and thank you, Raquel, for a magnificent presentation. I always love to see our most beautiful treasures shown like that. And I want to thank really Professor Weinberg for joining us today and generally on this amazing project. And I can really relate to what you said about not just creating access to the items, but using them, finding the ways to connecting people. And this is basically the bottom line of my presentation. So I can just stop here and move on to your question. No, I'm just kidding. Let me share my presentation and a little bit go over our digital library and our digital mission as a library. Well, Raquel touched upon the law, the Israeli law, the National Library law, and our mission according to the law. And the important words here are creating access to history, culture, heritage, Judaism, music, and et cetera, et cetera. But creating access is really the old library mission. The librarian standing in its library, waiting for people to come over and ask, trying to find specific materials, if you have this book or this subject and so on. But creating access is only one aspect of the challenge. As Professor Weinberg stated, we're digitizing almost everything, and this is what libraries and museums and archives are doing in the past 20, 25 years since the beginning of the internet age. Because at first everybody thought that taking an object and making it, transferring it from being a physical object to being a digital object, and then creating an option for people to view and use this object online is enough, or is actually what the online revolution is all about. But this is only the beginning, because creating access doesn't really make people or enable people to connect with the materials, because the material itself is far from being enough. Let's talk about which kind of materials do we have, and then talk about the challenge of connecting it to people. And so the numbers are here. Let's go over them slowly. We'll start with books, as we're a library. Most of people aren't even aware that we have different kinds of collection or different formats. So on the book section, 130,000 books is a very small part actually of our collection. And that is because of copyright restrictions. Copyright laws is one of the biggest challenges that we have. We and other libraries and institutions that are enabling access to content, because copyright laws, according in applying to books in Israel, states that the book is protected under copyright laws for 70 years after the death of the author, which means most of the modern part of the collection is still under copyright. And if it's still under copyright, we will not invest in scanning it, and we will prefer to scan other things that are available or are copyright free. And so the 130 scanned books are the entire public domain part of the book collection, which means all languages, all books in all languages printed before, let's say, 1925, 1930, roughly. That, again, depends on the specific author's death date. Most of the books were scanned by Google as a part of the Google Books cooperation with the NLI in the recent 2 or 3 years through the Corona period. About 50% of these 130,000 books are in Hebrew and in Hebrew languages, which means Yiddish, Ladino, Judeo-Arabic, and so on. And the other 50 is a blend of different languages: English, French, Russian, Latin, Arabic, Spanish, and so on. Every book that was or published in the land of Israel or about the land of Israel or about Judaism is in this list. Moving to the left, historical newspaper pages. Those of you who are aware and maybe use our JPress collection, this is probably the biggest database of Jewish newspapers in the world. We have newspapers covering more than 200 years since the beginning of the newspaper age in the 18th century, in more than 30 countries and more than 20 languages. This is a very important database, and it should be mentioned that it's searchable with OCR layer, with a digital text layer, which means you can search for a specific keyword or a key phrase, and then you will get the specific articles in which the keywords are written. So it's both an important database and a very useful collection. On the right hand, the manuscript section. Many of you are probably aware of the Ketiv collection, the Hebrew manuscript collection. This is an NLI initiative working with libraries and collections from around the world, creating access to Hebrew manuscripts. So about 90,000 manuscripts are in Hebrew, and the other are in Latin and in Arabic, as Raquel just mentioned. Archival items. We have more than 1,000 archives of different political leaders, poets, authors, and academic figures from the history of the Jewish people and Israel. Some of them are not fully scanned because of copyright issues. An archive is basically the desktop of the writer from decades ago, before the age of the desktops. And so you can find them mailings between the authors and other people, and sometimes private photographs or private writings. And so we are very careful, trying to be careful with these collections. But on the other hand, again, this is a very important collection, and you can find amazing treasures if you dig in deeply in there. Photographs. 3 million photographs is probably the biggest online collection of photographs covering the state of Israel and the land of Israel. About 150 years of photographing, from the pioneers of the photographings of the photo era in the 1860s and 70s, people who made trips to the land of Israel and took amazing albums, and moving to very recent collections of news photographing collections, like the Dana Dani collection that Raquel mentioned, which covers basically every event, whether it's political or social or cultural event in the state of Israel in the first, let's say, 40 years of the country. Some of the data is very good in this collection, and some of it is not very good. Like, we have photographs that states Tel Aviv 1935, and that's the entire knowledge that we have about this photograph. So this is a very promising collection with very various creative ideas that I can think about of how to use technology to create better access and better use for this collection. Moving to our music collection, not many people are aware that libraries, and especially our library, collects music in exactly the same way as we collect books. Every music album being produced is preserved in the library. And so we have 35,000 of Israeli music free of copyright and free to use. And that's an important mention, coming again to the copyright issue. In music, the Israeli law and most of the laws of countries of the world states that the record stays under copyright in the first 50 years after the recording, the day of the recording of the album or the song of the music. And so moving 50 years backwards, most of the beginning of the Hebrew music, the Israeli music in the state of Israel, and important pieces of music, of Jewish music, is available online. A major part of it is the Kol Israel collection. This is the way that music was being recorded in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. You know, the famous artists, let's say Shoshana Damari, came to the Kol Israel radio station, and the Kol Israel orchestra was playing live, and it was recorded one time to a record, to a vinyl record, and later on to cassettes and CDs, and today digital albums. And so the Kol Israel collection is fully available through the API, beautiful materials from the early ages of Israeli music. Two different kinds of collections that, again, Raquel touched upon. Posters, our ephemera collection, is a very unique collection covering the cultural life on the one hand, like cinema ads and theater ads on the one hand, and Pashkavilim, Orthodox Jewish messages tapped to the wall in Mea Shearim, in religious neighborhoods in Jerusalem and in other places in Israel. So it's a very diverse collection. It's completely transcribed, so the search and browse options are making it more useful. And again, I can think of a ton of creative ideas of how to make these already interesting materials into more appealing, more interesting to people worldwide. Our maps collection is also a very different kind of collection from a library point of view. It varies from old collection, like the one that was shown by Raquel, that are handwritten or hand-drawn and are basically imaginary or mostly imaginary, with sea creatures and pilgrims going up to Jerusalem. But on the other hand of this collection are modern maps produced by the British Mandate and by the Ottoman regime and by the young state of Israel. So again, a lot of creative ideas can come from using maps of different kinds of this collection. Coming to an end, video, oral history, as Asher mentioned in his introduction, most of the video collection is again oral history. That means interviews, camera interviews with people who are involved in making history or telling about history. Part of this collection is the Toldot Israel collection, which is interviews with the people from the 1948 days, people who were involved in the creating of the state of Israel. Other parts of the collections are interviews with immigration leaders from, for example, from the Soviet Union, the Siruvnikim, and from the Ethiopian immigration leaders, from the Sholomo and Moshe operations in the 80s and the 90s. Again, very important collections describing history and not being access to the right way. We are still not using technology the right way to make people connect and use this a very important part or collection. I'm going to finish off with 4 million catalog entries, which means, and Chaviv, our API engineer, we're going to talk about this later on, our entire catalog is available through our APIs, which means the entire metadata is available, and you can use it, and you can search it freely, and you can also use it for creating products. You don't necessarily have to work with the data, with the images, with the text, with the music itself, but you can play with the metadata for different targets, different uses. Again, I can think of many creative ways to do that, but I want to move forward and talking a little bit about the goal or what we're trying to get here. Because coming back to what I said at the beginning, the fact that millions of items are available online and you can go to the NLI website and search and use these amazing materials doesn't necessarily mean that people actually do that. Well, of course, people do that, but not in the numbers that we wish for, because people do that as using the old library method of coming to the library and asking for materials. And in our age, the age of information, most people are not necessarily going to the NLI website. They're not necessarily even aware that the NLI exists and these treasures exist online. And so we're trying to find creative ways to engage people, to come to people, to take this material and connect these treasures to the people and connect people to the treasures, which means the implementation in daily life is probably the bottom line of what we're trying to find in this competition. Taking the materials and making them usable in mass numbers in ways that a library as itself cannot necessarily think of or cannot develop on its own. And we need the creative minds of the public to find ways to connect people and making them use the collections and not just enabling access to the old library. We don't want to stay passive and wait for people to come to us. We want to be active and engage people with the materials. So I'm going to take a break here and breathe a little bit, and maybe we're going to answer questions later on.
Thank you very much, Yaron. Before the next speaker, Chaviv, let's do a short session of Q&A. There are many questions regarding the format and copyright. So Yaron, I will be happy if you can answer of this question, maybe to write it. But let's do a session, a short session regarding the general questions. Peggy is asking, how will virtual reality and social VR and the metaverse be used in the new National Library collection? Will the new National Library have a Teen Tech Center? So this is part of the challenge of the competition to think and to bring solutions like a metaverse and VR and etc. And there is a question regards, does the student competition have an age, grade, level, or limit? Asher, I think the answer is no, right?
No, students are anyone from grade school up to the end of graduate school. So it's a pretty broad range.
Okay. Okay, the next question. Okay, I think that we will hear Chaviv, and then if there will be another question, so we will give you all the answers.
Yeah, thank you, Liron. First of all, I saw already that there were a few questions that are related to the APIs and technical questions. I'll first present my short presentation. I hope that you will still be with me, although we are on a late time here in Israel, but it's a very focused presentation. And then I'll answer questions that are not part of the that are not covered by this presentation. Just 1 minute. Let me share this presentation. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is the APIs of the Open Library. Or first of all, my name is Chaviv. Sorry, my name is Chaviv. I'm leading the development of the Open Library, which is the basically interfaces or external interfaces to access from external systems and machines to the very large collections of the library of the National Library of Israel. And I'll present what APIs we have, very few of them, and what are the abilities of these APIs. So moving forward to the, you see my screen, right? Okay.
No, Chaviv, we don't see your screen.
You don't see my screen?
No.
Okay.
Okay. Now it's okay.
Okay. So as I said, we have very few APIs as part of the Open Library. Open Library is a project that, as I said, offer a few APIs to access all the digital images and objects of the National Library from outside of the library. But we have also an API that offer, as Yaron said, the ability to access our metadata, which is related not only to digital objects, but for any object of the National Library. As Yaron said, we have 4 million of items, and those that are not digital items, but hard copy items still have metadata, and we offer the search API that can provide the metadata for them. So we have three APIs. The first one, as I said, is the search API. Search API basically covers all the items that we have on the National Library, whether they are digital or not. And the output of this API is a list of items, which means that it provides for each item a short list of attributes, very narrow information for each item, but a lot of items are returned based on the search criteria. It could be one, and it could be thousands and more records on the output. In few minutes I'll show exactly a demonstration how to access and what are the main abilities of this API and the others. The next one is the manifest API. Manifest API basically is a query on a specific item. Once, for example, we searched by criteria, let's say, for example, that we search for all items that are containing the word Jerusalem as part of the title, and we got back hundreds of records, and there is one specific record that we are interested, one specific item that we want to dig into it, and maybe eventually to see the related digital item, then we can access the manifest of this item and get more information or a lot of metadata information related to this item. Unlike the search API, that for each item we have very few attributes that describe this item, the manifest API has extended information, extended metadata for this item. But again, unlike the search API that returns output of for many items, the manifest is focused on a specific item that was selected, and by its identifier to get this information. So the scope is a digital item for the manifest, not a hard copy item, and the output would be metadata for a specific item. The third one, the last one, is the image API. Image API basically returns the digital item itself, which means the output is whether is either an image or an audio file, video file, and basically it's the digital item itself, not the metadata of this item. And again, this is a specific item. It is queried by the identifier of a specific item and returns the digital item itself, subject obviously to access right that was previously mentioned. I mean, you can consume any digital item, image or an audio file only for those items that are allowed to be accessed directly with no issue. Just want to emphasize, I mean, a lot of items can be accessed through our websites, the National Library websites. Many of them would be accessed by our browsers, including all the cover and the logo of the National Library. The APIs, unlike the websites or the pages of the National Library, provide atomic data or directly the image itself if you want to embed it later in your suggested application or some other idea like that. Moving on to the search API that I just mentioned as the first API. I just want briefly to describe the abilities of this search. The search API, the search API, similar to the Merchav website that the National Library offers, provide the ability to search and narrow the search for specific items based on a few criteria like material type. If you want only to see maps or only maps or only manuscripts, you can filter by a material type. Again, string compression means that you can compare a metadata attribute like title or creator or something like that against a string like Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, or any other string that is 3 characters long or more. A date range, obviously, you can narrow by a specific century, year, and even a single day. Accessibility, this is again goes to the rights, the access right rules. You can filter only items that are accessible, digital items that have no access right limitation, and in that way you will know that any item that returned at your search would be accessible if you go down into the item and try to consume this the related digital item. But obviously you can see other items that are not necessarily accessible as digital item from external for external systems. But if we're talking about search, obviously there is a point of accessing all kind of items and understand the metadata and maybe provide and maybe provide some understanding or projects that are based on the metadata itself, even if this is not items that can be digitally accessed by external system. Availability, again, whether this is a digital item or not digital, and there are a few different types, and there is documentation that describes what exactly are the different availability and accessibility and material type values but on the developer page that I will in a minute describe. Just a minute, sorry. Sorry for that. Okay, let's. So what I want now is to continue and demonstrate how exactly we are using these APIs in hierarchical way. First of all, I'll demonstrate a search, then I'll pick from the search a specific item to get its metadata, and eventually to go into its to go in and consume its digital item. So just one. Okay. Okay, so what we can see over here is a search command. Just 1 minute. As you can see over here in the command line of the web browser, I'm using a search. This is the search of the National Library of the Open Library. This is the syntax of the API. This is a search. On this search, I was looking for a specific or a specific type of item that has a specific title and a kind of map. In this search, we got back two records. Each record provides few attributes. Provide few attributes as an output. For example, the title of this item, and we can see also that there is a link to the manifest, which is the extended metadata for this item. So if I'm clicking this link to get the extended metadata for this item, I'm activating this the second API. This API returns back not only the title and then a few very few output attributes, but also the dimension of this this attribute and a link to its digital item, a link basically to the image API. And as I said, there is also the dimension of this object, the type of this object, etc. If I'm going here inside this manifest and clicking the ID under the resource, this is basically the activation of the image API to see the image itself. And over here, as you can see, I went directly to the JPEG file of this item, the JPEG of this map. And now, as I said, and you can see here, you got directly the image of this map. This image can be embedded into a different site without the National Library logo. Maybe you will have to mention, according to the licensing, you will have to put a credential or something like that. But eventually, you can decide to create your own web page and to embed this image directly and put your text around this image. Obviously, you can also you can see the similar page of the National Library that include the National Library information for this item on our site. Okay, here you can see the title of this item, and you can see over here the image itself. And by the way, over here you can see an editor, the National Library editor, that allows heavy zoom in into this map. But this is something that this is an ability that the National Library offers to this to this object, but as I said, you can directly take the image and put it inside your page. So basically, this is a demonstration of of how we are using how to use our APIs. Where to find now? Where you can find more information about how to activate these APIs. I made a very short demonstration, and obviously you don't have the syntax written in front of you, but over here on the Tarboot website, you have on the materials tab, you have a link to access the National Library APIs, which is a website that we offer that provide an explanation of all the APIs that I just presented. This is the entry point to the National Library of Israel for developers. This is the web page. You can see here that there are links to the search API, manifest, and image API, and inside each one of them redirects you to a link or to a page that explain how exactly to use these, how exactly to use the API, including what are the attributes that can be used, how to narrow searches, what are the relevant identifiers, and so on. Additional, well, I have your demonstration to the web page itself, but I think that it's fair enough that you'll go to the Tarboot website and from it go to the National Library of Israel for developers. And if you have questions, you can issue them, and obviously I'll be happy to answer questions of how exactly to use and how exactly to make narrow searches and so on. Additional features that we are planning to, additional capabilities that we're planning to implement that are not yet there on the as part of the open library are search in text file. This is mostly related to the historical newspaper that were mentioned by both Rachel and Yaron. Generally speaking, we don't have search into a text, but search. But the search that I presented is search and returns metadata. We are considering to develop a search that would allow accessing or allow returning a text and pages from the historical newspapers that are already indexed and are available for public. So this is being considered, and another thing that is not yet supported but is being considered is a search by collection. So far I mentioned, or previously I mentioned, the ability to search by materials type, like books, maps, and so on. Search by collection means that you will be able to search not only by a type of, or the material type, like whether this is a video or an image, but also if we have a lot of collections of images. We previously, I think Rachel mentioned the Dana Dani collection. This is a collection of images. We have a lot of other collections, but if you want to make a project that is for a specific collection, then this is something that we are considering to add. That's it basically. Now, if anyone has a question, I'll be happy to answer. Otherwise, I can try to answer questions that were raised during this session on the chat.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chaviv. Most of you are in the beginning of your workday, so we don't want to bother you. But there are many questions. Most of the questions are about copyrights or the material. So I hope that Chaviv and Yaron answered on the questions that concern to the material. And if not, so you can ask us again. I want to invite Yaron to say a few sentences about the copyright.
Yeah, thank you, Liron. Just to make a quick conclusion of the copyright issue, because I think it is interesting or problematic to many people, many of you. We work by the CC copyright laws, which means we have specific copyright information attached to each item in its metadata. So when you search the catalog, you can also search by filtering the copyright status of the item or the collection. Most of the items that we have available through our API are public domain. Public domain means CC by 0. These items are completely free to use to any target, to any goal, whether it's educational, cultural, or commercial. You can take the item and print it on t-shirts. You can make coffee mugs. You can do whatever you want with these items. They're completely free to use. This is one part of the collection. The second part of the collections have some restrictions, mostly regarding to the end use of the items, which means they have they're not allowed to be used for commercial purposes, but only for educational and sometimes cultural targets or goals. And so these two parameters should be taken into account. Other parts of the library collections, restricted materials are not available through the APIs, besides what we said about the catalog API itself, which means you can retrieve the metadata about a book or about any item which is in copyright, but you cannot retrieve, you cannot take the image itself, the scanned image, should it be available in the library. You will not be able to use it through the API. So I hope this makes the copyright issue clear. Anyway, if you have any other questions, I'm inviting you all to write to us and we'll try to provide as accurate information as we can.
Okay, Yaron, thank you very much. I want to say that this meetup is a recording, and of course that we will send it to you, I think maybe tomorrow or day after tomorrow. Now, I hope that we answered all of the questions. Now, if not, because it's pretty late already, so we wrote our email, and you can see our email address on our website. It's and I want to encourage you to send us your questions, and I promise that we will answer on these questions as fast as we can. Okay, so I want to thank you for this meeting. It was very nice for us, and we are waiting to see your submissions. Thank you. Goodbye. Good morning or good evening. Bye.